No matter who and how would want to intimidate us, to suppress our will and consciousness, no one has ever succeeded in doing so. As I already said, they haven't succeeded now and they will never succeed in the future.
Very much similar to the previous ones, although, of course, the big change has been that Putin and Russia in general has completely broken off relations with the West, both politically and economically, which is causing a huge transformation in the way the economy is going to be run and where Russia is going to earn its money. And the basis, the foundation of Russia's prosperity has been its ability to export oil and gas. Those gas exports were largely going to Europe and have been since the 70s and since the pipelines were blown up last September. That income has finished and it will take, I don't know, many years to resume because they have to build new pipelines. The same's true of oil. Again, the bulk of Russia's oil was being exported to Europe. And that's been a bit easier to fix because the sanctions that came in last year have meant that oil business, those exports to Europe. Russia has managed to successfully redirect its entire oil and oil product exports to Asia, namely China and India. And now the rest of the economy has to be readjusted. It no longer is able to import machinery from Europe that it was reliant on. All the other exports, fertilizers, chemical products, metals, what have you, also have to be reorientated to new markets in the global south. That's the export. I mean, that's the economics of it, which is a massive challenge to rebuild a system that's been built up over 70 years. Politically, the war in Ukraine continues. The clash with the West continues. Putin is looking for security guarantees that Ukraine won't join. He's going to ensure that by not withdrawing from Ukraine, or at least getting Ukraine to concede all these territories that Russia's taken, that now are concede that they're now under Russian sovereignty. And politically, I mean, at the level of democracy, the people in the streets, what's happened in the last 2 years has been, gloves off, a massive repressive crackdown. And the tolerance of any sort of dissent has completely evaporated. So I think in some respects, Russia's going to return to the way it was run in the Soviet Union, where the message is managed, freedom of speech is crushed, alternative views, alternative lifestyles are going to be stamped out. And it's going to be this sort of workers' paradise, ideal family type, conservative values are going to dominate. And the politics are just going to wither away what little politics there was before. The overwhelming consensus is that Putin is just going to play a waiting game to see what happens in the November presidential elections, because there we have this complete wild card of Trump coming in, possibly. And if Trump wins, that will end American support completely. That's a game changer. I think Europe already admits that they can't continue to support Ukraine by themselves forever, and they don't want to. And if the Americans bail, then I think the pressure to call some sort of ceasefire will grow rapidly. And that's Putin's, his goal here is to see what happens. Even if Biden comes back in again, the funding for Ukraine is in question. And that plays to Russia's advantage. He's just waiting for Ukraine to have increasing problems funding the budget, supplying it with weapons. And so he doesn't have to push very hard. He just needs to keep the pressure on. The use of nuclear weapons is non-zero probability. It is possible. However, I strongly suspect it'll never come to that. And what makes me say that is that it's an event you can never go back from, and you'll go down in history as someone who bombed civilians with a nuclear bomb. And America's never got over Hiroshima, Kawasaki. However, it's a last resort, and actually that's Putin's trump card, which is what's keeping Macron's promise to put French troops into Ukraine off the table. That's not going to happen because the Russian nuclear weapons policy is that it can only use them if there's an existential threat to Russia, which means the loss of territory. So in the scenario where NATO comes in and they storm and recapture the Crimea, then that's a possibility. Then I think Russia would think about using a tactical nuclear weapon in order to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think everyone on NATO's side understands that very well, which is why NATO has been so reluctant, so adamant that it's not going to get pulled into this war, because no one wants to go there. And the options then for, if it does come to that, to go a little bit further down that road, then one of Russia's advantages is it has these very small half-kilo tactical nuclear bombs, whereas the smallest ones that the US has are about 5 kilos, much bigger. 5 kilos will flatten a city. Half kilo will flatten a district in Kiev. So it's basically not that much bigger than a large conventional bomb. And Putin could choose to send some warning shots by using one of these very small tactical nuclear weapons, simply to make the point that I've exploded a nuclear bomb. It didn't kill that many people. It flattened, a district in Kiev. But we've now reached the red line that the West will not cross. I can't see anybody in the West ordering a retaliatory strike to such a small tactical bomb because of the terror of the mutually assured destruction of a nuclear exchange. I mean, now Navalny himself triggered the repression by returning to Russia in January 2021. Up until then, the Kremlin had always done this sort of repression light, where they'd crack down and hassle the opposition media. But when Navalny came back and just walked into the jaws of the tiger in the airport and was immediately arrested, it was guaranteed that there would be a huge international outcry, which actually I think was Navalny's intention. I mean, he wanted to make a statement. It was a piece of, grand staging political theater. And for him personally, it backfired. If he was banking on the West intervening for his cause personally, that didn't happen. Merkel backed off very quickly to say that, German foreign policy is not going to be linked to the fate of an individual. However, for the Kremlin, because they burnt what little credibility they had left, they just stopped pretending anymore. And it went from repression light to full Soviet era crackdown repression. Dozens of people were arrested. What was left of the opposition leaders have been arrested and jailed for between 15 years, 25 years. Journalists were arrested on accusations of spying. The term for that has been increased from 25 years to life. Dozens of opposition media were simply bankrupted or closed down, at the very least, or fled into exile. And it's changed. So the chance for what little chance there was for democracy has been killed. There's no opposition left. There's no one left active publicly at liberty to do it. Well, he's just won a 6-year term, one of two. So in theory, which will take him up to whatever it is, 2030. So in theory, he can stay in power until 2036. From what we know, leaks from the inner circles of the Kremlin, that he's actually tired. He would like to retire. However, he doesn't feel like he can until, mission accomplished. And he's far away from that. And with this break with the West, again, as I said before, he's got a huge amount of work to do in order to rebuild Russia's economic presence in the world, focusing on the East or the global South instead of the West. So I don't think he'll feel that he's finished the task. This term, definitely he's going to stay full 6 years. It remains mute as to whether he will then run again, but then he's been getting into his 80s. I think it's kind of likely that he'll step down at that point, depending on the state of play of the economy and how things are going with the international showdown.